Good morning. How's everyone doing? So welcome to our session on hybrid business intelligence in SharePoint and Office 365. My name is Chris McNulty. I'm with Microsoft.
John White with Unlimited Viz, makers of Tygraph.
We'll get to more about ourselves in a second, but we have the unenviable task of being the first session in the morning of the last day after the attendee party. So we appreciate the fact that every one of you is a diehard for being here, and we can't think of a better way to get this Friday morning fired up than going straight to a demo. So without further ado, what we want to do is walk you through an example of some of the things that are possible with hybrid business intelligence. So we're going to walk through a scenario right now to give you some clues to the kinds of things that are possible. We've been talking all week, if you've been to any of our other SharePoint sessions, about Contoso clothing, which is a fantastic, fashion-forward, hip retailer working on bringing fashions to young shoppers all over the world. One of the things that we know at Contoso Clothing is we get great telemetry from our line of business systems about what people are buying. And we know from our return process about which things aren't buying, but we don't have a good way of figuring things out in between. So one of the things when we're taking a look at what we're able to do with our modern application interfaces is if I look at Power Apps, Power Apps is a fantastic way to empower someone to be able to be out in the field and collect data about what they're observing in stores. So the Contoso Clothing Field Research app is designed so someone who's in the field observing buyer behavior can report back information about what someone is doing between walking into the store and purchasing. We're specifically trying to capture information about articles of clothing that people look at, that they might take off the rack or try on, but then never complete the purchase. So the Power App I have up here on the screen right now is a fairly decent Power App demo, if I will say. We've got some background procedures in the app for how people should work with it, a map of locations around the US so people know where the stores are, and we can come here and enter a new field shopping thing. So let's call this one Friday AM. And we are in Atlanta. Spelling counts. And our product, let's say it's going to be a men's formal jacket. And our customer action is going to be, it was tried on, looking at 99, no other comments. We're done. Save the record. So when I do that, I am actively pushing that information in real time back into a SharePoint list. And let's take a look at that list right now here. We are on 7. So here I am inside of a modern SharePoint list tied to our Contoso clothing tenant. If I look at all the information that's out there, the moment I put that in, we should be picking up in real time. Let me just refresh on this.
I have to.
Information as it comes in.
There yet?
Let's take a look. Am I connected? Okay, so we have the information here. Let's put one more in. So the other thing that I can do inside of a Power App is be able to, something that we're showcasing this week, this is one of the brand new capabilities for Power Apps, being able to do an embedded Power App here. So this is an early prototype of what the embed experience is going to be. And here I can see what a Power App looks like while still inside of the browser. I'm now dancing all over John's machine here. There we are. And in the same way, I can put information in here saying Friday 2. Let's make this a shirt. unracked. Put it in for $99. OK. We're good to go. When I come back and look at the view here, we should see something's amiss. We do it to enable the embed experience, and we're getting a little bit of a glitch here. This is definitely a prototype on the code. So there's the risk of showing live code here at the demo. So what happens in this process is this information flows to a SharePoint list, at which point we have a live flow that picks the information up and pushes it back into an on-premises data warehouse. Inside of that on-premises data warehouse, let me just close all of these. OK. Put this one more time in here. Putting information in directly into the list. Ladies' dresses, maybe I'm just shopping in the wrong department. John's had an awful lot of fun as we've been building this application out. When he puts information in for me, it's always in the women's department. His information is always in one of the men's departments in Toronto, so you can usually tell when you look at the application who's put what values in. $49. Customer action is browsed. Save that. OK. So when data gets into the list, and here's the last couple of things we've put in, we have a live process that's picking it up and is looking for John to approve this before it can write to the data warehouse. So John, I think you want to come over here.
I should. I'm not sure if that mail's coming in. Oh, there we go. OK, so it should have come into my mailbox. And I can pop over here, and there we go. So Chris, just basically by putting that item in the list, it fired off a flow. And that flow, the first thing it wants to do is prompt me to add some metadata. And I have three choices. I'm rating its I'm rating its priority. I'm just going to select medium, and that's all I need to do. So I can, that email, by the way, is my actual email address, and that's coming from a prototype demo environment. So you can work with people outside of your organization.
So that information now is using Flow. It passes live into a data warehouse. We've put some visualizations on that inside of Power BI, which we've brought back inside of SharePoint. We look in here at a modern SharePoint page on my team site, and one of the elements that's here on the page is going to show us that research. So let's take a look here. We're looking for the big ta-da.
We took the one part off.
Yes, we took that one part off. One more time.
Results, yeah.
Anyway, this is the live Power BI dashboard, which is picking up the information in real time. As we push it back into the on-premises database, we can come here, do any of the typical Power BI behaviors. So as I move over different charts and click on it, we can drill in and see the places where I've put reports in. You can see being from Boston, Massachusetts, being down here in Atlanta, and spending a good bit of time in the Redmond area. This is the data I've put in. The reports that John has put in are confined to a tiny town on the northern shores of Lake Ontario known as Toronto, shopping at different stores. But basically, this information is all here available live in real time. That's the core of the demo we wanted to walk through. Let's take a look at where we are. Surface. OK. So apologies for some of the glitches here in the demo, but let's kind of walk you through what we're going to be doing today. We're going to go through some brief introductions and then explain what are the major building blocks of hybrid business intelligence, the elements for reporting and the elements for storing data and orchestrating amongst them between on-premises and cloud. John's going to walk through a number of scenarios where we're actually putting that through its paces, moving in each possible direction out there, how data moves around, and finally wrap up with some best practices. So John, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name, as mentioned earlier, is John White. I'm the I'm the CTO and president's right here. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called Unlimited Viz. I'm Canadian. I'm from Canada. I know it's early. I'm a Office Server and Services MVP and a SQL Server VTS. So we play primarily in the business intelligence space with a product you'll see briefly later that does analytics for Office 365. Oh boy, it's morning. It's early. 365 and Yammer. Over to you, sir.
I'm Chris McNulty. I am a recovering MVP. I've been working with SharePoint for about 16 years at this point. I joined Microsoft last year after a number of years spent running a consultancy and then as Chief Technology Officer at the once and future Quest Software. In case you haven't seen, Dell Software is now going to rename itself Quest. So, yes. I specialize at Microsoft in forums, workflow, enterprise content management. I've been working in the business intelligence space throughout all that time, so it's really great to be here this morning. So we know that in looking at cloud workloads and moving to the cloud, I don't want to trivialize the process of transforming an information architecture because figuring out the best ways to classify unstructured content and documents and so forth can be a substantial undertaking. But those large data repositories, line of business systems, sometimes they need to remain exactly where they've been. And in many cases, your data that's on premises is tied to other systems, and the cost of transforming that to the cloud, if you choose to, can outstrip the benefits of having that information out there. So we know there's lots of data that is in on-premises stores that absolutely needs to stay there. Now, at Microsoft, we like to say mobile first, cloud first, and that's not just a mantra, but it's a fact. We're going to bring new capabilities to on-premises environments after we are able to bring them out in the cloud. We can iterate rapidly, we can make rapid changes, and if it is something that we can package and bring into an on-premises environment, we're going to do that. But certain capabilities, and particularly what we're doing with Power BI, require so much burstable capacity in the cloud that they're really cloud-only workloads. There are other workloads, like reporting services, which are traditional on-premises capabilities. And the pros and cons of each tool, as John's going to walk us through in a few minutes, mean that some of the frontline systems that I want to report on, I want to select the best visualization for the best data source. And sometimes the best visualization system and the best data may not be in the same place, which leads us to hybrid BI. We also know that many of those big traditional data repositories are on premises. The top-level executives in companies want to be able to get to that information frequently, not just from printed reports, as people used to do historically, or even from on-premises data reporting systems, but be able to get to it from all their devices, wherever they happen to be able to make intelligent, informed decisions wherever they are in the world. And then finally, we understand that as more workloads are moved to the cloud, those capabilities mean that more data is happening out there. People are setting up information in SQL Azure, in online systems like Salesforce, and those really need to be included in analyses alongside traditional data sources. So we know that that's definitely one of the things that's going on. That's why some of the core capabilities are really important to look at how they are set up and orchestrated. Now, recognizing that there were a couple of glitches in this, but fundamentally, the demo that we already walked through begins with a Power App that lives out there tied to a cloud data service. This isn't a particularly deep dive in Power Apps, but Power Apps is hosted in Azure. The applications are orchestrated from the cloud directly to mobile devices or to the browser. From there, we pushed the information directly to a SharePoint list. We used a Microsoft Flow to get the approval to bring it back into an on-premises data gateway, at which point it tied out to SQL and pushed back to Power BI, which is then embedded back into a SharePoint modern page. That's the core of the first demo that we walked through this morning. Question over here?
Oh, you probably wouldn't. This is just demonstrating that you can.
No, so that's really a question of interface design. So in many cases, can you go directly to Power BI? Absolutely. oh, we're trying to show all of the different possibilities that you might have there. You could bring the Power App directly to SQL Azure. There's lots of places where I might happen to put the data. In this case, hypothetically, we already have a data warehouse here. So we're trying to come up with an orchestration that shows ways that users can see the data, interact with it. We have a team that needs to bring that information. They work in SharePoint. So the more I can bring that point of consumption close to the point of collaboration, the fewer disconnects I have in that process. One of the things that we know from research is that anytime I ask a user to change tasks, to have that paradigm shift of I was in Excel and now I'm going to jump to Word, there's a 20% loss of efficiency, and the risk factor is that someone, once they go off task, never gets back to what they were trying to do in the first place. One of the keys to unlocking productivity, we know, is that level of application integration, which is why the more that I can do to bring my visualization close to the point where my users are, the more efficient I'm going to be. So when you are looking at information that's resident in the cloud, though, there definitely are some issues to be mindful of. Cloud performance, no matter how much Microsoft optimizes things, there's only so much one can do about the speed of light. Capacity is second thing to be mindful of, but probably the most salient point here is data sovereignty. In traditional data warehouses on premises, your data yesterday is where it is going to be tomorrow. You have choices with cloud vendors, and you definitely have choices with Microsoft where I want to put that data relative to any of the currently running 34 Azure regions around the world. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on television, but there are definitely issues, not just of latency, but data sovereignty, about understanding which classes of data can be in certain jurisdictions and which can't. Information like US HIPAA data, healthcare-based information, typically need to remain resident within the US. And unless you've taken certain protocols, if you're interacting with personal data coming out of the EU, that information is considered the property of the person it's about and needs to remain resident in the EU without prior structures. So these are things to be mindful of. In many cases, though, if you need to work with that data, and you, for example, are US-based, the ability of the cloud is that I can now actually keep that data in the jurisdiction that it's relevant to without having to go set up my own bricks and mortar. The cloud gives us an easy way to intermediate that and get that information out there. John?
Oh, I thought you were grabbing them. I got it. Got to clear the throat. And no, I wasn't out last night. The problem here is, as Chris alluded to earlier, the right tool isn't necessarily in the right place as far as you're concerned. And there isn't a one-to-one equivalence on-prem and in the cloud, nor will there likely ever be. You can see you have a whole series of tools along the left-hand side here. You have a whole series of tools along the right. What's important is to understand how they actually do line up and what roles they all play. It's obvious that Azure SQL DB lines up fairly well with SQL Server. It's going to store data. But there is no such thing as SQL Server reporting services in the cloud. Our reporting technology in the cloud is currently Power BI. And it doesn't do the same things. So if we need something that one does and the other doesn't do, we need to be able to get access to it. My throat. At least I'm audible. To understand all of this stuff, I want to walk through some classic BI architecture. We typically, and this is the way things have been for years and years and years, and it's still the way it is really from an enterprise standpoint for the most part. We have various data sources. The first thing we want to do is abstract that data away. We want to take data from all of those different sources, run them through an ETL process, and dump them into a data warehouse. Now, a data warehouse is just a database. From the data warehouse, we go out into data marts. Data marts are subsections of that data warehouse. Think retail. You go to a store, the store gets its goods from a warehouse. That warehouse is optimized for gathering the goods. The store is optimized for presenting it. Same thing here. That's really the difference between the two. Data also goes into multi-dimensional storage systems, OLAP or tabular mode in the SQL world. From there, we have various servers that can report on it. Reporting servers in the Microsoft world, it's reporting services. Middleware servers like SharePoint, they take data and package it up slightly differently, or visuals, package it up differently into a portal, and present it to the user. And finally, we have direct clients, things like Excel, or report designers, Power BI desktop or reporting services, report builder. See some shots being taken, so I'll let you do that. These slides will be available, by the way. It's a little bit different with Power BI and Excel. Excel was first with this. Power BI follows exactly the same model, and that's important to remember. And it's designed around personal BI. So we want to take away all of that heavy mechanics as much as we possibly can. But we still have to accomplish the same tasks. Granted, we're not usually doing them at the same scale, but we are solving the same problems. And thus, we have various data sources. Same thing as before. We have the ETL process. But in this world, this ETL process is performed by what used to be called Power Query, still is in some places, or just get data in the Power BI desktop interface. From there, that data is cached into basically a data model within the file. In Excel, it's stored within the XLSX. With Power BI desktop, it's stored in the PBIX file. From there, it can be published out to the Power BI service. The Power BI service then takes that cached data and puts it in its back-end storage, which is essentially a massive farm of SQL Server Analysis Services servers in the background. You never see them. You just go through the Power BI interface. From there, various clients can interact with the service. Mobile clients, which is very important, and of course, browser clients, and Excel. We'll see a little bit of that in a bit. Now, once we've published out that data cache, how do we keep it up to date? It's a snapshot of data at a point in time, and because we used Power Query, or get data, it's refreshable. We can go and update the data contained within. How do we do that? Well, first off, we have the clients that are using the service. We also, by the way, have Excel Online, which we can tie to Power BI. So if you're an Office 365 user and you put an Excel workbook that has an embedded data model into a library, you can tie it to Power BI and have it update the underlying data for you. We'll see that in just a bit. The way that's done is there's a service in Power BI, the update service, where if your data source is already in the cloud, that's pretty straightforward. It can just go get that data and update the underlying model. And you can do that for a wide variety of data sources and for all of the Power BI content packs that are out there. What if my data is on-prem? What we need to do is go through the online data gateway. Now, this has been around for a little while and has had multiple names. But today it's called the on-premises data gateway. It installs on your premises, as you might think, anywhere you want, and connects to your back-end data sources, a wide variety of data sources. And then the service connects to it. Actually, it connects to the service. It's an outbound connection, establishes that connection, and then answers calls to have the data refreshed as needed. All right? Now, what if refresh isn't fast enough for us? What if we need real-time access to our analytics data? We use what's called direct query. We can use exactly the same tools in a slightly different model. There are restrictions in doing so, but we can. So once again, we have the service. The service connects through a virtual now model. So we can have data model calculations all we want, but they aren't actually stored in the service. This is important from an enterprise standpoint where we have data sovereignty issues. In real time, whenever a user makes a query of the service, that query is passed right directly back to the cloud data source, if it's a cloud data source, in fact, or it will come right back through that data gateway and connect to on-prem data sources. The number of data sources are significantly lower than in the refresh model, but it's being increased all the time. Are you all with me? All right. And again, Excel Online can do this. So if you set up your Excel workbook to have a direct connection to an SSAS service on-prem, that can, or online data sources, it can reach back through them and back through the gateway and connect back to those data sources directly. So all your Excel-based analyses will work. And that is a list of them. How many, or what is supported by direct query as of a few weeks ago? It changes pretty much monthly, so you'll need to stay on top of it. And I think, yeah, there's a URL at the bottom of this slide that you can follow along, get the slides later, and check out if your data source is supported for direct query. There are other caveats involved using it, but it's there. One thing you should know, however, when you're setting up that gateway, depends on the back-end data source that you're connected to or connecting to as to what sort of credentials you want to use. If you're connecting to SQL Server Analysis Services, you need to use a very high privilege account, a manager level account. This is because we actually pass the identity of the user making the request back to the SSAS box, and that account acts as an intermediary. That account needs a high level of permissions to do that. All other data sources, that's not the case. The account acts as a proxy, and that means you want to use a least privilege account for each individual data source. It's an important concept, and I don't think it's well enough documented. All right, so when we look at all of that stuff together, not to scare you, that's kind of the overall architecture of the Power BI service. Add in one thing. There's another way to get data in here, and that's through the Power BI API. The API lets us write directly into a data model, and we can make that as real-time as we want it to be. So we'll have an application that does that for us. That kind of completes the picture for Power BI. Now, you'll notice fairly central to this whole thing is this on-premises data gateway. And it's central not only to Power BI, but to Power Apps and Flow. I'm going to let Chris talk to that.
So the on-premises data gateway, if you think about the history of this, Power BI introduced the gateway several years ago as a one-way process. When we started looking at the ways that we were going to orchestrate information like Flow, like Power Apps, which need to be able to not just pull data from an on-premises source, but in many cases push it back, the Power BI gateway was the logical contender for that. When you install the latest version of the on-premises data gateway, it will install on top of and replace the current Power BI environment. It acts as the broker between the Azure Service Bus and the on-premises data sources that are out there. Everything moves through a secure tunnel, so you don't have to directly publish your data sources from on-premises out there naked on the internet, allowing you to safely be able to keep the data resident where you wanted it and be able to light it up inside of the cloud. Power Apps and Flow also are cloud-based services. And one of the questions we've had a lot this week is understanding where do Power Apps, where do they live? These definitions live inside of the cloud. Power Apps and Flow, with the connector framework, come with about 4 dozen data sources that are available. Things like direct connections out to Salesforce or Dynamics, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, all the usual suspects, as well as a goodly range of consumer services like Facebook and Twitter. Along with Power BI, they participate in all those data connections and are able to come back through the on-premises gateway to those line of business sources if they happen to be there.
All right. And now we're going to go through a few different scenarios. But first off, I want to distinguish between some different report types. We talked a little bit earlier about using the right tool for the right job. Last fall, Microsoft put out its reporting roadmap. It was also known as, I think, the Boxes Back event, where they announced they're investing on-prem heavily for BI as well as in the cloud. And as part of that process, they articulated 4 different report types. And I'll just go through the functions of them. The way they define them, I don't necessarily define them this way, but it's important to understand it. Paginated reports are reports that are designed to be printed. They're typically reports you run on a periodic basis and answer questions that you know you already have. We just need this month's sales report for whatever is a perfect example. Interactive reports are reports that help you answer questions you don't know you already have. They let you drill around the data. They let you poke, why is this the case? And I can highlight things and I can uncover secrets of my data. Analytical reports, well, they kind of do the same thing as interactive reports, except with a different tool. We'll see that here in a second. And mobile reports are exactly what they say. They surface these things on mobile devices. I classify these things into two types. I think these last three are just subsets of one particular type, but that's what it is. This does line up rather well with Microsoft's product structure, which of course makes sense. And there we go. So paginated reports are what we think of as classic SSRS reports. Now, we can't think of SSRS as just doing that anymore because with 2016, it does a number of these other types, and more are coming. Interactive reports, Microsoft means Power BI reports, and these are the reports that run in the cloud, connecting back to on-prem data or not. They are served up by the Power BI service. PBIX files, you use Power BI Designer to build them. Analytical reports, Excel. So Excel, analytical, this is what they mean. And mobile reports, when Microsoft says mobile reports, they mean that product that used to be called DataZen that is now integrated into SSRS that gives you a way to design reports specifically for mobile devices. Now, we're going to talk about cloud reporting, so that's typically going to be around Power BI. What does Power BI give us? Doesn't do paginated, not yet. We don't know if it will or it won't, but it would make sense given that they want these two services to have complete parity ultimately. It does render interactive, of course. That's kind of the native format for it. It renders analytical. You can work with Excel files with full fidelity right within the Power BI service. And although it doesn't render those former DataZen style reports, all of its reports are available on mobile devices anyway, so I don't think that matters all that much. So we're going to cover off a few of them. All right, we need to switch.
Okay.
And we're 7, right?
We're on 7?
Yeah, that's it.
Close this out. By the way, we do have, this is the screen that we were on before, just picking up. I wanted to point out,
go for it.
This is the Power BI web part. It's not released yet, but the Power BI web part will allow you to add entire dashboards or selected elements of dashboards anywhere you need inside a SharePoint modern page. So.
Yay! Okay. I've been waiting for that for a long time. Yes? Sorry. It's not on-prem yet. We're going to talk about that, but yeah.
Okay.
It starts out, we're walking before we run, but it's designed in such a way that it will.
There's a couple of things that would need to happen first. We need the SharePoint framework to be available in an on-premises environment before we can stitch up this part. So it's definitely our intent to be able to do that, but I have no more information I can share about that.
So what we're going to do is we're going to report on our secret shopper data that is contained in the data warehouse on-prem with Excel, save it to SharePoint Online, and work with it. So I'm going to start with a blank workbook. I'm going to come up here to the Data tab, and I'm going to select New Query. This is what we used to call Power Query. And I'm going to select from Database, from SQL Server Database. And I'm going to punch in the name of the server. And it is inspections. I'll click OK. This isn't SSRS. Sorry, I can't quite hear. I'm going to come over here. 2016, specifically, yeah. Sorry? SSRS 2016.
So folks, we do have a lot of demos to get through. We'll try to deal with a few questions as we come, but in general, we'd like to keep the Q&A till the end. This is a recorded session, so for the sake of those who are participating after the fact, it's much easier if we can try to do that.
So with Power Query, we get a little window on what data will come in. I'm going to go ahead and load that data in, but I'm going to be careful about it. I'm going to come to this little drop down. I have not changed the defaults on this Excel workbook. The defaults for pulling data into Excel are to pull it directly into the workbooks, which is not a really good idea from a data analysis standpoint. And it doesn't work for our scenario. So I'm going to have that load to, and I'm going to select only create connection. I don't want to bring the underlying data into a workbook. I just want to bring it into my data model where I can analyze it. So I select add this to the data model. You can set these options as defaults, and I suggest you do so. I'm going to go ahead and click load. Power Query runs. We can see 16 rows have loaded in. There were 15 this morning. I know Chris's demo worked eventually this morning.
Yes.
And so I want to do a quick analysis. I have a question to ask in my data. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to insert a pivot table. And I'm just going to use the workbook's data model, which is the default. I'm going to click OK, open up my incoming reports model. And I want to see what everybody's been looking at. And we've got reporter, and you can see Chris and I have both been out there, and product. And you can see, as Chris alluded to, he's been busy in the women's section. I'm also going to, I want to know how many of these reports we add in, so I'm going to select ID. I'm going to take ID, drop down in here into values. By default, it wants to add up the ID values. That's not what we want. We want it to be a sum. And I'm going to count. So, OK. And there's a quick little pivot table. If we want, we can add a slicer to it easily enough. This is all kind of basic stuff, really. But let's pick a slicer on store, just so we can see how dynamic it is. And we'll just drag this guy up here. We'll try to drag this guy up here. There we go. And we can see who's been where: Costco, Macy's, Nordstrom's, etc. I'm going to clear the filter. Then I'm just going to go ahead and save this file as, I'm going to save it directly into our Contoso SharePoint group team site, another nice new feature, into the analyses folder in the documents library. So I'm going to save that off as Ignite demo, and hit save. And once that saves up, I'm going to close it. And I'm going to come over here to my documents library in that very same team site. I'm going to go into analyses. And here's our Ignite demo. And as you might expect, it opens in Excel online, and it's completely interactive. It's completely interactive because we had the data stored in the data model, and that data model got put into that back-end SSAS service. However, if we were to come up here now to the Data tab and say refresh, we would get an error. It doesn't connect back to data inherently. We have to do a couple of things. So come down to here to Power BI. What we want to do is, from our tenant, we want to go out here and get data. We're going to pick Files. We're going to pick SharePoint Team Sites. And I'm going to grab the URL of the team site, as opposed to watching me fumble around with a keyboard. And I'm going to connect. When that happens, it goes out and finds all of the possible libraries, anywhere we can put files. We're in shared documents in the analyses folder, and Ignite demo. Now that I've selected that, I hit the connect button. The next screen is very important. What it's asking me to do, or what it's asking me is, do I want to import that data into a new Power BI model? Or do I want to work with that Excel workbook the way it is, which is what I want. I'm going to connect. And what we should see here in just a second is our new file show up here along the left. I'm going to just do a quick reload. I've noticed it needs it lately. And there's our Ignite demo right there. And if I click on it, you'll see same full fidelity Excel workbook rendered here. The nice thing is now, though, I can click this ellipsis, come down here to Schedule Refresh, open up the gateway connection, and you see we have an on-prem data gateway set up. All I have to do is tell the workbook to use that, and I can even have it automatically kept up to date. The problem with manually hitting refresh on a workbook is that it only persists for that session. It won't update the underlying file. When you use this option, a gateway will go out on a periodic basis, refresh that data in place, and even your Office 365 users get to take advantage of this. So now, if you want, you can do the schedule. You can come out here and refresh now, refresh on demand, all you want. You can also, from Office 365, do that same data refresh option, and it will go out and get that data the way you would expect. All right, so that's Excel. Let's have a quick look at Power BI. Now, what we want to do with Power BI is connect to that data live, so we don't even have to worry about refreshing it. The way we do that is we start a new Power BI desktop. We come out here to Get Data, and we want to pick SQL Server, as you might expect. And I'm just going to come and get my server name again. And don't try connecting to it, guys. We use a host file. Inspections. This is the important option to select. Import versus direct query. If we use import, we'll do what we just did with Excel, only with a different tool. If we pick direct query, we'll go get that data in place. We'll get that same dialog that we were used to. Which table do we want? I'm going to just go ahead and click load. And we get the complete set of field values down here. I'm not going to bother building this one out. We've got one baked already, and it's fairly standard procedure from a report building standpoint. But you will notice, normally when you're working with refresh models, you've got three options along here. You can browse the data. You can't do that with Direct Connect. You can create relationships, you can create visuals, but you can't browse the data. I'm just going to close this guy off. And I'm going to open this. And you can see this is a report that we've already built out in Power BI. When the report, it's connecting to exactly the same data source. I can go ahead and hit Publish, and what I'm presented with is a dialog box asking me where I want to publish this to. My workspace, which if you're using straight up Power BI, the free edition is all you're going to have, or any number of my group's workspaces, and these line up with Office 365 groups. Okay? I'm not going to publish it. I've already published it, but that is the procedure for doing so. I'm going to close it off. I'm going to pop back down here to Power BI just so you can see it at the end of the day here in my Secret Shopper report. Now, something I failed to show you before, and I'm going to correct that right now. I'm going to come back up here to my, which one was it? Ignite demo. That's correct. I'm going to come back up here to that Excel workbook I was working with previously. And this might be a piece of information that I want to see on a regular basis, on a daily basis. I'm going to come over here and just highlight this area here. And I'm going to come up and use this little pin icon. What's that going to do? Well, on my Ignite dashboard, I'm going to put this little visual. If I come up here to my Ignite dashboard in Power BI, you can see I've taken that little piece of Excel and plunked it down on a dashboard where I can put other things. What other things? Well, let's come down here to our Secret Shopper report. Let's say I want to see how much a slacker I'm being compared to what Chris is up to on a regular basis. So I'm going to just come down here, click the wrong thing. I'm going to click pin here as well. I'm going to put that in the same place. And as you might expect, that shows up here alongside the Excel. And that's automatically refreshed for us on the case of the right item as it is live, on the case of the left item as it is refreshed. Now, we got another class of reports. What about reporting services? I've got reporting services on-prem that I've already built reports out for connected to on-prem data. Let's have a look at that, shall we? Oop, that shouldn't be showing. Left it up. So I've got this inspections database that's connected to the SQL on-prem database, and I've got this reports by reporter. And I'm going to bring that up, and that is a paginated report rendered in SSRS. This is the new version of SSRS, so it doesn't look as ugly as it used to. It used to look pretty ugly. It lines up really well from a UI standpoint with the rest of the tools. But up here, we've got this little Power BI icon. What's that do for us? Well, I can come down here and select a specific visual. I'm going to come down here to our workspace for field research, and I'm going to put it in the Ignite dashboard, and I'm going to say, I want this refreshed hourly. And I'm going to pin that. So now, all at once, you can see I've got my Excel workbook. from Excel sitting in SharePoint Online. I have got a Power BI report element, and I've got elements from my SSRS on-prem all in the same place. And by the way, I can click on the Excel item, it opens up Excel. I click on the Power BI item, it opens up my Power BI report, as you might expect. But don't you know it, you click on that reporting services icon, it opens up in reporting services as well. Pretty cool, huh? It's not fair if you have to ask, is it?
Sure it is.
All right. So let's flip back, or did we? Cool. And how are we doing? Yeah, we're okay. So, just to explain what you saw, just to hit it home, in the first demo, we took Excel, we connected it to SQL on-prem. From there, we stored it in SharePoint. Once it was stored in SharePoint, we were able to render it through Excel Online in a browser. Great, we can work with it just like that. But then we connected it to Power BI, and Power BI was able to the user was able to connect to the Excel workbook through Power BI, and we're also able to keep it refreshed through the on-premises data gateway. We have a complete circle here. With the Power BI report, similar process. We fired up Power BI Desktop and built the report, only in this case it was a direct query report. We do have to connect directly to the data with our Power BI Desktop. We publish the report to the Power BI service. We connect to it with a browser or a mobile client. But when we make that request, instead of it going through that virtual data model, it goes straight back through the on-premises data gateway and runs the query on the back-end SQL server in this case, but it could also be an analysis services server. Good. Finally, what did we do when we published from SSRS to Power BI? Well, we had an SSRS report pre-existing. We ran it. It connected back to the data source, and then we pinned that element to the Power BI service. Once that's pinned, the user who's consuming the Power BI service can see it, and when they clicked on it, they're taken directly back to that SSRS server. That obviously has implications from a naming standpoint for the SSRS server. You're going to need a fully qualified domain name if you got your folks are out there on the internet. You're going to want to put it in a DMZ, all of that stuff, but it's possible. All right. So now let's look a little bit at on-premises visuals of cloud data. We're going to go the other direction. We're going to take data out of the cloud and bring it on-prem. And we're going to use a slightly different data set for this, because our demo was built in the cloud. We're going to use our product. It's called tyGraph. And tyGraph deploys, one of the ways it deploys is as a content pack. And with a Power BI content pack, you kind of get what you get. There's going to be a set of pre-canned reports, dashboards, and connections to back-end services. And that's what we're interested in here. What we're really interested in is what happens when those canned reports don't do what you want. Well, I can actually use Excel to analyze this data, and you can use it to analyze any data that's stored in Power BI in this back-end service. It becomes essentially a great big SSAS farm for us to use for very low cost. And it's exactly what it is. So if we were to come down here to...
Do you want me to put it?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So there's the product. This is the Yammer version. It's analyzing Yammer data. We have a whole bunch of stuff around that. But what we want to do is come down here to tyGraph, hit the little ellipsis here, and say, analyze in Excel. And what you're going to see happens is it downloads this little ODC file. Now, if you work with data in Excel, you know ODC is a connection file. And this contains all the identity management necessary to connect to this back-end SSAS service in the cloud. So all I have to do is enable this, and I can get access directly to that data model that's in the cloud. In this case, let's say I want to see how many threads all of our users have. I come down here to my users table. I'll just come up here and find username. It's always tricky when you're not sitting down, you know? Member name, that's what we're after. And then I'm just going to come up here to my metrics table, find, say, threads. And you get the general idea. I can play around with that, sort it out, but we're connecting directly to that back-end data with Excel. Now, another scenario is we've got data in SharePoint Online, and we want to analyze that directly. Well, we can do that too. Let's come up here, create a new blank workbook. And we're going to connect now to that secret shopper data that Chris was working with earlier, but we're going to do it directly to SharePoint instead of the on-prem data warehouse. We do that by coming up here to Data, go into New Query from Other Sources, and SharePoint list is right in here. So it asks for the URL for that SharePoint site, which I happen to have. And it should come back with a set of lists and libraries. And it does. We are interested in our fields report list. And I'm just going to go ahead and edit that because I want to make some changes. Now you can see when you connect to SharePoint, you get a whole lot of data that you don't need. I'm going to go ahead and select these 3 columns. And I'm going to remove them. I'm going to scroll over here. Author ID, all of this editor ID stuff. For the most part, I don't need. There is one column in here, however, that I do want. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And finally, I'm going to come over to the right of that and get rid of all of the rest of the columns. So the data is pretty much self-explanatory. We've got title, location, store, price. We got this product ID field. I don't want the ID of the product. Now, I could go out here and connect to the source product list because this was a SharePoint lookup list. A lookup column. I could do that, match it up, but I'd like it to be easier than that. So I'm actually going to come over here to this field values as text column. And what it does, what it should do, is let me, and it's not. What did I do wrong? No, I don't want to do that. Not getting my icon. Oh, there it is. Okay, I'm going to split that out. Sorry, I didn't see that icon previously. What the field values as text column does is it goes out and gets the textual representations of all of your SharePoint fields under the covers. Anyone who's had to work with managed metadata fields, lookup fields, person fields in SharePoint knows the pain I'm talking about. All I have to do is say, I don't want any of the columns except for product. I'm going to deselect the use original column name as prefix, and I'm letting Power Query go and do the work for me. So I can just load that in and work with the data in place. And you can imagine what I can do with that, pivot tables, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to belabor the point. You like that? That is well hidden, that feature. Finally, just to show that it's possible, I'm not going to save that. We're going to come back here to our SQL Server reporting services report, which is exclusively on-prem, and point out there's nothing stopping us from connecting to SQL Azure. And as an example here, I'm going to use the database behind a little system I built for analyzing the tweets here at Ignite. I don't know if any of you have seen that running around, but there's a little report. There's a Twitter traffic connection here that's connecting back to our in this case, our cloud-based SQL Azure database, and I've got a report, tweets today, and what the trends are. And you can see what the tweet pattern is now in this report over the past 24 hours and how it's been changing compared to the previous 24 hours. The first day was about 30,000, and it's been dropping precipitously ever since. I expect today will be a little quieter. But this is SSRS connecting into that back-end data, and I was actually using Microsoft Flow to populate that as well. All right. We can pop
back
over.
to.
Yeah. Was there a question there? No, okay. So, all right. So, and again, to hit it home, what you saw in the first case was the Power BI was my Power BI, Power BI service. I connected to it with it was using, let me start that again. I had a Power BI service that was set up with data from our tie graph service. It was getting refreshed every day. But there was a question that our product didn't answer, but was available in the data. So I was able to take Excel, connect to the service, and perform my own analysis directly into the service. It's wide open. The second case, we were able to take Excel and connect directly to SharePoint online in the cloud. Now, if we were to take that Excel workbook and share it out in SharePoint, it would work because we have Power Pivot for SharePoint available to us. However, if we try to update that, I just want to alert you that that's not going to work today in SharePoint on-prem. Power Pivot for SharePoint still doesn't support Power Query, but that's coming. All right. And finally, with SSRS connected to Azure, it's exactly what you may think. Because we can connect using SQL credentials, SSRS can handle that. We can connect live up into the Azure service, into SQL there. So, where does that leave SharePoint? So, SharePoint has been the deployment model for business intelligence on-prem for a long time. And as I pointed out last fall, Microsoft made a very public statement saying that reporting services is its platform. And you've seen a lot of the change here as services move away from running on SharePoint to running with SharePoint. And I'll just go through them quickly because I can see we're getting a little bit low on time. Some things line up directly with SharePoint Online, things like Excel. They work pretty much the same way in the cloud as they work on-prem. Performance Point doesn't and won't. There won't be a Performance Point in the cloud. So there's no one-to-one equivalence there. SSRS doesn't really work there, but its functions, and you start to see some of the features from a crossover capability show up. So it doesn't really necessarily need to. SharePoint was always about dashboarding, and it continues to be. Putting disparate report items together. So again, Excel web parts, we can use Excel web parts. SSRS, if we're running SSRS on-prem, we can't currently do in the cloud, but you saw us do that with the Power BI, with the Power BI workspace. So I can't see it being all that far away. Performance Point web parts are never going to be on-prem. And Power BI web parts, well, on-prem they don't exist now. We finally got to see them in the service. Yes. So SharePoint Online, and they should be able to come across. So let's have a quick look at that. What does that look like? The way it works is if we come back here to, I'll just switch, thank you.
Yes.
Let's quickly go back to our SharePoint site. Let's go back to the home. And we're working with some pages. I want to create a page that's going to contain a couple of reports or report items. It's really a simple matter of hitting the New button, creating a new page, coming down here and saying Ignite Report, and hitting this little modern web part insertion tool, Power BI. Who was excited to see that the first time? I've had people asking me for about 1.5 years for this thing. I click on Add Report. I grab the URL of the report, and you know what? I'm going to do it the hard way here. I'm going to come up here and come here because whenever you get to see it, I don't know if it's going to change by the time you get to see it, but it's the part before a report section. That's the URL of the report itself. I'm going to paste that in here. And it takes just a second. It should reach out. Boom. It's going to go and get that secret shopper report. There was a bug showed up like early this morning, and I don't know what it is, but it doesn't prevent. I just have to dismiss this. And it renders a report with full fidelity right within the page. I can pick which page if it's a multi-page report. I can also turn on the navigation pane, the piece on the left, or the filter pane, the piece on the right, or I can leave it alone. And all I have to do is publish this page. This is a full fidelity SharePoint page now. Something went wrong, I know. But I can slice and dice around on it as if I was in the Power BI interface, right within the context of my SharePoint page. Woo-hoo. Yes. More than one page, you just add another web part. Yep. And it's all done on the client side. I don't know if I'm stepping on what we do in a bit. It's currently in test in the online service. But once the on-prem SharePoint gets the SharePoint framework capabilities, there's no reason it shouldn't work on-prem. All right. So now we can pop back?
Sure.
Thanks. And now we're going to talk just briefly, I think, about hybrid data acquisition. Anybody know Rob Foster? He's in that picture.
No. You had a picture of the bee on the screen when you said that was Rob
Oh, that's
Foster.
Rob.
Okay.
Right there on the upper right. Well, he can be a bit of a pain. Sorry, Rob. How do we, so we want to talk about data acquisition. How do we move data around if we need to? Because don't forget, I mean, I'm showing you connecting to data in place, but perhaps you want to take your data and move it up to the cloud or move it back down. There are various tools that let you do that. SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services, has always been about that. It continues to be about that. Depending on your data source and your data destination, you can continue to use it. It's an excellent product and can move data bidirectionally. Chris loves SSIS, by the way. Now you can also use Microsoft Flow. And I wouldn't call it an ETL tool, but I'd call it an EL tool, because you can take data from all kinds of these source systems and pump it out into destination systems. Through the on-premises data gateway, we can bring it on-prem.
The one thing to keep in mind about Flow is a lightweight orchestration engine. I would not build a flow-based process saying, you know, on new record here in SQL, do something over there if I expect to do a 1,000,000-row load into SQL. That is not really what Flow is intended for. You're rapidly going to run up against thresholds and throttling if you're doing that. But for lightweight data orchestration, it's a really great tool.
It capped at about 4,500 tweets an hour during the keynote.
Yes.
Just so you know. You can also use Azure Stream Analytics, and that is super heavy duty. You're gonna be breaking out Visual Studio at some point when you do that, but that lets you build an application. This is really good for IoT type applications. Move things through an Azure Event Hub. You're gonna have to build that piece on the left. The Event Hub and Stream Analytics are gonna be tools that let you make sense of that data that's coming in really quickly, and you can load that directly into Azure or Power BI or a variety of other services. All right. And I talked briefly about that Twitter analysis tool. This is something, there's the URL at the bottom, bit.ly, ignite tweets, uppercase I, uppercase T. If you want to go see it, you can see it live. You'll get up to an hour delayed results of all of the tweets that have come across during Ignite. But that was built using Flow that triggered on any new tweet. Well, let's get to that, actually, because I think we show it. Yes. So anybody posts a tweet, Flow will kick it off. Puts it in a SQL Azure database. Why do I want to put it in a SQL Azure database? Jason was here. I think he's gone. Jason was the first one to do this. He gave me the idea. He put it in a SharePoint list. The guys at Microsoft, stop that. 5,000 items. I put it in SQL for capacity reasons, but also because Azure SQL supports direct query. So we can get real-time reports. We then used Power BI Desktop to connect to it, deploy it to the service, where then anyone can can analyze it because I can publish that report anonymously. Okay. Just real quickly, what does Flow look like under the covers? Because I had one open, because this is my account. It's very straightforward. Here's the Ignite capture flow that we have running.
Yep.
Yep, thank you. I apparently have a bad habit of this. I'm just going to edit that flow so you can see how complicated it is. When a new tweet appears, I search for MS Ignite. Insert a row. I connected it to a data source previously. It goes and reads the schema of that table. And in this case, this one's blank, so if I was to pop in here, or it'll give me options based on my field type, it'll say, here's what's flowing from the previous step. I put it in there. And that's it. I say run, and it takes care of all of the tweets at Ignite for the last week. And that's all there is to it, really. It's fairly straightforward. So, want to flip back? That's you.
That's me. So, you know, as we've been talking about this morning, there's been a rich range of tools, and over the past few years, with different things coming into service and things that we're waiting for, we're really happy to be able to show you at least a preview of being able to look at Power BI as an element of a modern page inside SharePoint Online. Stuff that we know that's coming up, and I don't have any information yet on dates. But
I saw there was a session at Ignite. The SSRS team said this fall for the item on the right.
So at some point between now and the end of the year, fingers crossed, you'll be able to take those Power BI elements and be able to render them inside SSRS for on-prem, as well as we look into next year, being able, hopefully, to do something with being able to bring Power BI parts into SharePoint Server 2016. So a couple of things we think that are important to land today. That on-premises data gateway is the key glue between data on-premises and data in the cloud. So I really encourage you to start downloading it. It's a free download, to test with it, to play with it. If you've already been using the Power BI gateway, it should feel very familiar to you. Power BI is the principal platform for online visualization. So mobile first, cloud first, that is where capabilities are going to be brought in first, probably the richest set of tools out there. For on-premises reporting, SQL Server Reporting Services is your best bet. When I do hybrid architecture sessions, one of the things I always ask people to keep mindful of is to match the intended business use of the system with where you're choosing to house it. There are certain capabilities, like team sites, that you can do with equal facility on-premises or in the cloud. And then there are certain workloads like SSRS, full trust code, that are exclusive to the on-premises license. So the goal is not to have a random mishmash of here's a report, here's a visualization, I'm not sure which to do where, but understand the business needs and the point of consumption. Some of the issues that we were talking about, data latency, data privacy, data sovereignty, have an awful lot to do with where the data needs to be consumed. SharePoint is a key integration platform. If you go back to SSRS integrated mode, the way we were looking at SSRS in many cases 5 years ago, it was not just an integration platform, but a delivery platform. The more services were coming together, one of the key missions of SharePoint as we move into its second decade is to be that integration glue between all the disparate I shouldn't be standing, I'm on the scratchy throat side of the stage now, apparently. All of the integrations that I need to do with data, with people, with searches, and with reporting and visualization, it's the key glue to bind all those things together using the power of a team site. And lastly, and most importantly, who you are matters very much. There's trick questions we ask people in Office 365 adoption about which workload moves first, Exchange or SharePoint. The reason why it's a trick question is it's typically none of the above. It's Active Directory. Because if you don't have a way for your users to seamlessly move between on-premises access and cloud access, you have dissatisfaction issues if people have to remember 2 different sets of passwords and where to go. So making sure that you're bridging that identity using tool sets like AD Connect is really important if you are intending to keep a seamless experience for your users across the range of solutions that we have out there. So it is very late in the week. We recognize that we have many cool capabilities with Power BI, but we don't have the capability of giving you a time machine, other than if there's a session that we're presenting here today on the screen here. Everything's been recorded. Please direct you back to the MyIgnite site so you can look at those online recordings, download decks, and get your questions answered if you were unable to do that today. That said, thank you very much. John and I will be around for questions.
Thank you. Questions?
And if you liked us, please give us great recommendations. And if you didn't, there's a paper recommendation form in the back that you can with a self-addressed stamped envelope, and you can mail it to us.
Yes, sir.
No, please. We're still on recording.
Yeah,
so.
the microphone would be best so people can hear. Yeah.
Okay, so 2 quick questions. We use Power Pivot on-prem. We do the scheduled refresh and all that type of fancy. It looks like to me that same functionality in the cloud is using that Power BI Excel scheduled refresh that you guys are showing. Is that supposed to be that feature parity between the two?
It's the feature It's more than feature parity. The one in the cloud can refresh Power Query. One on-prem can't.
Okay.
But the one in the cloud can certainly do just the native import into the data model.
But if I want to take what I have on-prem and move it to the cloud,
it'll work.
that's the way I'd have
with
to
the
do
gateway.
it.
It should work.
Because I can't use Power Pivot in the cloud, right?
You don't need to use Power Pivot in the cloud. That capabilities are, so what Power Pivot, you're talking about Power Pivot for SharePoint specifically, right?
Yeah.
What Power Pivot for SharePoint gives you is a way of automatically updating. I mean, there's a couple of other things, but that's fundamentally what you want with it.
Right.
You don't need it in the cloud. That's done by the Power BI service in conjunction with that on-prem data gateway.
Okay. Second question is, we were considering moving our SSRS environment into SharePoint integrated mode just so that we can do more, workflows and all that type of stuff. So is this something that we should continue to think about doing, or should we go a different direction?
It's a tough call. I've got a blog post on this exact topic.
Okay.
With 2016, so up until 2016, for the past few versions of reporting services, all of the cool new stuff has been in integrated mode only.
Yeah.
The SQL guys didn't like that. They don't want to have to be dependent on SharePoint, and I don't blame them. SharePoint, if you don't know it, is a bear to set up. I shouldn't say that. SharePoint has its own challenges. I'm not Microsoft, I can get away with it. I'm a SharePoint guy. So we've loved it, but the SQL guys haven't necessarily, and it's been two code bases for that team to maintain. With 2016, we see a lot of these, the prettiness, that's all there in SharePoint integrated mode, but we don't see an awful lot of the other stuff. You can't do that pin to Power BI in integrated mode, for example.
Okay.
That's a native mode only.
The mobile reports for SSRS, the data's in acquisition, that's unique to native mode.
Yeah.
So it's, I started working with SSRS back in like 2001,
Yeah.
and native mode felt awfully primitive for a long time, and it's great to see it's finally kind of leapfrogged in terms of integrated mode. So that would, yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is the good web parts require integrated mode,
Yeah.
and the old ones are deprecated. That story's got to get better, and it is going to get better.
Yeah. So one
But
of
you're
our
in
main
a
things
tough
is,
time right now. Mhm.
So yeah, so one of our main things is we really want to have, better, governance around these reports, and, be able how to do more self-service reporting and approvals and permissions. I feel like are easier in SharePoint versus they are in SSRS. I mean, and I haven't seen done what was 2016, but the stuff before that sucks. And, it's just an awful, experience compared to the SharePoint experience that you get.
So my recommendation would be do both for a while. You'll be ready when it's time, when that integration story gets better with native mode. You'll be able to use SharePoint integrated mode for what you need it for.
So what would I
and
do
you'll be
both?
able to try the new things in the native mode.
So as far as doing both, what would be my scenario for one versus the other?
If you want to use mobile reports, if you want to use that pin to Power BI, all of those new features.
So mobile reports don't happen in SharePoint integrated mode?
No.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
sir.
guys.
Thanks.
Do you have anything in your blog post that you talked about having both of those in a SharePoint environment like that, like how to arrange them?
Yeah, the question is, have I articulated the difficulties in managing both systems? What I do is I call out the differences the web parts is primarily how you're accessing it, and why you wouldn't be able to use one in certain scenarios. So yes, but there's not really a lot of difficulties in integrating. This just becomes effectively an iframe URL call for the native mode server. Sir? No. Yeah, the microphone would be great because then they hear that on the recording.
So mine is very simple. I have SQL Azure. I have a database in SQL Azure, and I want to present this in SharePoint Online, and I want to surface it using Excel Online, so that when you go to SharePoint, you open your Excel online, then you're able to see the data in SQL Azure. Now, when I tried that some time back, I was not able to refresh. The refresh function was not there. So then it meant that I had to present it as a list using BCS so that they could see the latest information. Now, basically what I'm asking is this: are you able to refresh from Excel Online to a data source, which is SQL Azure?
Yes.
Yep.
You should be able to. Yeah, I've done it a million times.
I tried. Okay, if it is there, I'll really like to see that, because when I tried to build this the last time, the refresh was not there.
Yeah, I don't know if we had our contact information up there, but reach out to me with an email or something like that. I could make sure you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's if you like. Come up to me in a bit. I'll get you a card as well.
So, folks, we're just about out of time for the recorded session, but thanks for sticking around. John and I will be up here in the front if you have any other questions. Thank you.